Well, good afternoon. I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm delighted today to be joined by the Premier of Alberta, Premier Jason Kenney, for an hour-long discussion. If you have some questions for us, we are live on YouTube, and I'll be monitoring the chat line, so feel free to send me questions as we go along. I did promise the Premier it would be a COVID-free zone. I said I'd take a drink of Jameson's as soon as anyone said COVID or variant or vaccine or social distancing or mask, but I'm going to break the first rules, Premier, and I'm just going to say it's a pretty big day. We've moved into phase 2 today. Tell us what you're expecting as more businesses in Alberta open up.
Very happy to be at this point, and I want to thank Albertans for their diligence. I want to thank everyone that got the jab, that got vaccinated. Because of that, we reached the threshold for population protection through first dose coverage at 60% of the eligible population 14 days ago. We need that 2-week lag for those vaccines to have the full effect. And that's why we're able to proceed today safely into phase 2 of the Open for Summer plan. Let me just say one thing to your members, Danielle. Sometimes business people have been saying to me, shell-shocked after the last 16 brutal months of the uncertainty and restrictions and everything. They're saying, well, so it's open for summer, but what are you doing in the fall? So let me be clear. You heard it here first. This is the Open for Good plan, because by the time we get into the fall, let me just back that up a second to say this is stage 2. So it's limited reopening of gyms, places of worship go to 1/3 of fire code capacity. Bars and restaurants can do in and outdoor service for groups of up to 6. Retail goes up to 1/3 maximum. Movie theaters, auditoria, libraries, and a lot of other places like that open up as well. So go to the AHS website if you want to know the details. Up to 20 people can gather outdoors for social gatherings. Increases in the numbers for funerals and weddings. So all the details are online. And now, Danielle, we are racing as fast as we can get to that 70% first dose coverage. Unfortunately, things have slowed down a bit because just the first dose demand is starting to taper, and we're only crawling up by about 0.3% on that key metric every day. So I want to say to your AEG business members and just anybody who's listening, if you've been holding back, just waiting, maybe it wasn't convenient or you had some doubts, but you still intend to get vaccinated, please do it now. We've got walk-in clinics, no appointments, no paperwork, all across the province. If you've been vaccinated outside the country, like let's say snowbirds in the States, we're now going to open it up so you can register that online, because we're going to get every extra number in the system we can, counting up to 70%. The faster we get there, then there's a 2-week lag to phase 3, which is complete opening. And I know that some of the nervous Nellies out there don't like this, but they've got to get used to the fact that vaccines work. The science supports that. We will be opening up fully at a level of population protection higher than anywhere else in the world that has opened up. If they could do it safely, we certainly can. And it's not just for the summer, it's for good. We know of no variants which are effective against the vaccines that are currently in play. The vaccines become the replacement for restrictions as the as our management tool for the virus in the future.
Premier, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but today may be the day that every business in Alberta is able to open in at least some measure for the first time since last March. Is there anything that's still left closed?
Not off the top of my head. I think you're right about that.
Like you've got festivals and grandstands. Speaking of, we know that we've got some big festivals and grandstands planned in the next few weeks. Are you feeling pretty confident that everything's going to go ahead as planned for Calgary Stampede?
Yes, there's one issue we've been working on, Danielle, which is getting a national interest exemption from the federal government to relax quarantine and travel restrictions for international performers like rodeo athletes and officials. So the Stampede needs about 135 people, mainly from the US, cowboys and others, world-class athletes to put on the rodeo. And they're running out of time because if those folks don't get certainty on their ability to work at the Stampede next month, then they end up signing contracts with U.S. rodeos. So I've been spending a lot of burning up the phone lines with Ottawa this week, trying to get that national interest exemption. We've just been told that we've just got it, and we don't actually have the. I won't believe it until I see it signed. But it's been I'll be blunt with you, a last minute scramble to get the feds to show that reasonable flexibility. But with that in place, there will be a stampede. It won't be the same as in the past. The chuck wagon circuit just didn't have time to get organized this year, for example. But the Stampede's going to go on. And I think when I talk about the greatest summer ever, some people on Twitter mock and ridicule that. What I mean is just getting our normal lives back, grandparents being able to hug their grandkids, people being able to go over to their friends for backyard barbecues, being able to teenagers to take their boyfriend, their girlfriend to the Midway, go and watch the rodeo. It's the basic joys of life that I think we will appreciate more than we ever have after these 16 brutal months. The Stampede is going to happen, just like Dr. Hinshaw said. In 2013, we thought the floods would kill the Stampede, but Calgary rallied together and we saved the Stampede. The same thing is happening this year.
All right. Let me ask you about your relationship with the federal government, because I guess there is one more area, even when we do get to phase 3, that's going to have to be sorted out. And that's a return of full international flight service to both Calgary International Airport as well as Edmonton International Airport. What can you tell us about the progress we might make there?
So Alberta has been the most outspoken province in calling for a sensible change in travel restrictions. We have to continue to be careful with the variants circulating in certain countries where there's real hotspots. So Alberta's not suggesting that we just lift all travel restrictions. That would not be prudent. But nor should we be maintaining the kind of policies currently. What we're really asking for is that the federal government implement the recommendations of their own expert panel on COVID-related travel, which called for an ending of the hotel quarantine policy, and that's happened. But it just seems like a no-brainer, Danielle, that we should facilitate travel for people who have been fully vaccinated, particularly if they're coming from countries with low levels of viral spread. That's what's happening in Europe and many other places around the world. So we are advocating hard for that with Ottawa. In fact, I was just speaking to a federal minister about that last night. And Minister Chandra has made this point. I have with the Prime Minister and my fellow premiers. To be honest with you, Danielle, there are a few other provincial governments which are being very cautious about this, that are not on board with our recommendations for a prudent relaxation of travel measures. But bottom line is, I think we'll be there probably, I think sometime in July. I hope that the federal government will move forward. They did take a baby step on the hotel quarantine situation this week. And I'm hopeful that by July, August, by the time we get into August, that we will have a more sensible travel policy in place. We desperately need it for the future of our tourism industry, our hospitality industry, and the travel industry. WestJet is a backbone of the Alberta economy. Before COVID, we were lobbying WestJet hard to locate as many of those new Dreamliners here as possible so we could get more direct nonstop service around the world, not just good for tourism, but also for commercial connections. And so we need WestJet strong. And that means we need to get some common sense back into the travel policies as quick as possible. So we're fighting for that. It's a bit of a tense situation right now, but I think we'll get there.
All right. Let's continuing on and talking about the relationship with Ottawa, because I've noticed a couple of collaborative announcements in the last few days. And in fact, I've been watching your Twitter feed, and I know you do a lot of COVID updates, but my goodness, there's just amazing good news stories on the business front. And two big ones in the last couple of days with Air Products, a major hydrogen installment going into Edmonton, but also this trunk line that the 5 major oil sands producers are getting in to be net zero, to have carbon dioxide go on a pipeline to a centralized location so that it could either be stored or turned into useful products. These sound like pretty amazing achievements, and it looks like they're all levels of government participating.
Yeah, these are like massive game-changing developments. I'm glad you recognize the scale. So first, some context. The Conference Board of Canada did a report this week which said Alberta is leading Canada in economic growth in 2021. They are projecting, I think, 7.3% expansion of GDP. And most of the major chartered banks and economic think tanks agree with that projection, that we're leading the country in growth. And Danielle, I'll come to those two announcements, but if you don't mind, let me just back up and offer some context here. This is the best year in the history of the forestry industry in Alberta, with incredibly good prices and capital shifting here from BC because they've overregulated their industry. We've cut red tape, guaranteed access to fiber, and we have some very exciting announcements coming up on forestry. They're just doing amazingly well. Agriculture, last year, second best farm gate receipts in history. We're started into this year so far with good weather, with great prices, and there are some major announcements about value added and processing that we'll be making this year. Some really exciting things. We're talking billions of dollars of additional investment in Alberta-based ag, food processing and related areas, and plus our $800 million investment in modernizing Southern Alberta's irrigation infrastructure, which will improve yields and that will help with exports. Venture capital, best year ever last year, and already in the first quarter of this year, we saw more venture capital activity in Alberta than we have ever seen in an entire calendar year. As you know, Danielle, venture capital is the fuel that behind the innovation tech sector, the startup companies, which are driving so much of global economic growth. So that is really good news, because it was a lack of access to VenCap that was really holding back the information technology startups. We're seeing amazing activity in that area of startups. IT generally, in the last 6 weeks, we have announced the decision of Infosys, a global IT company, to locate at least 1,000 seats here, and that's likely going to grow to be 3 times that. And then last week, Emphasis, another Indian global IT company, announcing 1,000 positions minimum in quantum computing, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in a partnership with the University of Calgary. We worked hard on that. There's some other major tech investments coming. Danielle, we are living right now a transformation in the tech sector in Alberta, which is so exciting. Film and television, best year ever in terms of productions that are underway. Doug Schweitzer and I will shortly be announcing formally the largest ever film or television production in the history of Canada that will be shot in a multi-year, multi-series production, creating thousands of jobs in Alberta. And I could go on, but the big industrial tickets here will be in areas like hydrogen, for example, a key part of our natural gas vision. And we have a natural hydrogen strategy. One way that we can ensure a future for our oil and gas sector by reducing emissions so those companies can access capital with increasing stringency on global ESG metrics, environment, social, and government metrics. We've got to work with them to reduce emissions. Hydrogen is a big play in that. So yesterday, Air Products, the largest hydrogen producer on Earth, made a massive commitment, $1.3 billion, going to create 2,600 construction jobs to produce hydrogen that will be consumed by the oil sands producers to help them reduce their emissions, to help them ensure access to capital. It's a win-win-win, and also it creates greater demand for natural gas that will keep gas prices up. That helps with upstream jobs. So this isn't all just, green tech and all that stuff. This is, if we're concerned about the rig hands out there and the service industry in rural Alberta, that means more drilling for natural gas. That means we need good prices, increasing domestic consumption through hydrogen as part of this. And I'll just close with this. We are yesterday's announcement was the front end of a hydrogen revolution that is coming to Alberta with our huge, abundant, and inexpensive natural gas feedstock, with our world-leading carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology, with the CCUS infrastructure that you talked about, like the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, with our low taxes, our shrinking regulatory burden, all the good pro-business stuff, with the second best geological formation on Earth for carbon sequestration, we are, and with trillions of dollars of capital moving towards the nascent hydrogen industry, you are going to see yesterday's announcement replicated several times over the next couple of years. It's very exciting.
It is exciting. And the thing that I worried about initially, because I have interviewed the Green Party leader, Annamie Paul, before, and she seems to want to segregate hydrogen into different types of hydrogen. I'm not seeing that the federal government is doing that, though. I was pleased to see that not only were you on that press release, but so was Don Iveson, and so was Seamus O'Regan. Can you just give us some insight into how the federal government is approaching this? I think we're often feeling like that we get kicked around by Ottawa and they don't respect our industry. And I'm seeing, at least on hydrogen, there appears to be some meeting of the minds and some kind of breakthrough.
100%. And I was saying to my caucus this morning about our relations with Ottawa that even in a dysfunctional relationship, you still need a relationship. You still you might be a competitor or an adversary, but you still need to be able to find common ground and get things done where possible to your mutual advantage. They want to reduce carbon emissions. Okay, that's their number one goal. Our number one goal is job creation and economic growth. We think we can marry the two with things like hydrogen. And you're right, some on the green left, they're just obsessed. It can only be green hydrogen, which basically means that the production is only done with renewable power, which is intermittent, all sorts of technical problems. The bottom line is we're open to green hydrogen if it works on a market basis, if people are going to invest in it. But the truth is, it is right now not scalable in an economic way. But blue hydrogen, there's a growing technical consensus across the world that blue hydrogen is becoming economic for large-scale production. It does require infrastructure, though. And when I say that, it means things like the carbon trunk line, because in the hydrogen process, they take off the CO2. The project announced yesterday is net zero CO2 emitting. So they take off the CO2 and they've got to inject it somewhere. They've got to transport it somewhere. And Danielle, I'm not sure if you were one of them, but there were a lot of people. I think you guys in Wildrose at the time were. There were a lot of people on the right, and I was one of them in Alberta, I'll admit it, who were very skeptical about the Stelmach government going into carbon capture and storage 10 and 15 years ago. It's true. It was untested technology that was not economical then. But the costs have cut it. The cost per unit of CCS has come down by about half over the past 10, 15 years. And that, plus the infrastructure we've built through the specified gas emitter regulation revenues, now the tier revenues, technology innovation emission reduction fund revenues, that has supported the Quest project out at Shell, other pilot projects, which are now getting scaled up. It supported the Enhanced Energy Wolf Midstream Alberta Carbon Trunk Line project. And with the announcement by the major oil sands producers yesterday of their collaboration, we can expect to see more major carbon infrastructure like that built. So I know I'm throwing a lot of concepts out there, but it all ties back to making large-scale blue hydrogen production economic. And we're very happy that on this, at least, the federal government and Alberta are aligned.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Let me just go into the issue, though, of carbon capture and storage. I mean, you're right. I was skeptical about the Stelmach government's approach, but part of the reason was I thought that there would be, if you had far more companies collaborating and investigating, researching this area, you'd end up with more companies who would develop successful concepts. And I guess I'm worried now that why would we bury carbon dioxide? I'm hearing so many interesting ways that you can take carbon dioxide and turn it into useful products, whether it's for industrial minerals or fly ash for concrete, or whether it's for carbon fiber. Do you have some thoughts on that? Do you think that there's going to be a way to develop those industries?
Yeah, 100%. But obviously, Danielle, it's not either or. It's both and. We can sequester huge amounts of CO2 while also supporting new product development using CO2, like all sorts of tech. You've named some of them, but carbon fiber holds enormous potential to be a game changer in all sorts of applications. There's a lot of good pilot projects in Alberta underway, some of it at our universities, and we want to be world leaders in that area as well. Let's make good commercial use. Let's add value to that CO2 that we capture. There's also great potential in direct air capture, which I'm not a technical. I'm far from being a technical expert on this stuff. I'm a generalist, but My understanding is that direct air capture today is kind of where CCUS was a decade ago, still fairly nascent, not yet economic, but holding great potential. And one thing, Danielle, there is a lot of money flowing around international capital markets, increasingly looking for a place in areas like green tech. And so there will be a big injection of investment in things like direct air capture and commercial applications of carbon. So I'm optimistic about all of that. But the bottom line is the oil sands companies have come together saying they're going to put up a lot of money. And we managed, you asked about our relationship with Ottawa. Well, our number one ask of Ottawa in this last budget was to have a generous tax incentive for investments in carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and they did commit to that. We won a victory in principle. They didn't lay out the details. There's a consultation process starting today, I believe, for 90 days on the details. We were disappointed that their budget language on carbon capture and utilization, CCUS, had a caveat that it could not be used to incent carbon capture that leads to enhanced oil recovery. For those of your members who are not familiar with this stuff, as you know, Danielle, enhanced oil recovery is where you take huge amounts of CO2, inject it into into depleted wells, typically, where there might still be a reservoir of oil, but it's not easily recoverable. What they do is, and I'm going to put this in just plain English, they inject it, and then they use that pressure to help recover abandoned oil reserves. So you end up and you end up with net zero or net negative carbon production of oil as a result. This can be very positive in the conventional basin. So we're not, I won't say fighting, but we're advocating very strongly with the industry that Ottawa allows us maximum flexibility and that we have an incentive for CCUS that is at least as strong as I think it's called the 46Q in the US tax code, which has led to major investments in CCUS technology in the United States. So that incentive will bring more capital into this. That capital will create jobs, and those projects will reduce emissions, which will increase the access to capital of our industry. I think it's a virtuous cycle in principle.
Let's talk a little bit then about whether this has the capability to undo some of the damage of the extreme green campaign against our energy industry, trying to drive it into the ground with what they called the tar sands campaign. I know that you've got a public inquiry going on into that. I don't know if you can give us some idea of when the results of that might be revealed. But do you think that this type of approach has the opportunity to change the way the world looks at Alberta?
Yes, well, absolutely. You know what? I think what happened, Danielle, starting about 15 years ago, when the tar sands campaign started, was a really highly coordinated, deliberate effort to tarnish the brand of the Canadian oil sands. And you remember those front page stories, National Geographic about 12 years ago, suggesting it looked like Mordor and all of that stuff. And it was all distorted. It was propaganda. But our energy companies, they're made up of brilliant engineers, scientists, finance folks, geologists. They're not political. They're not PR people. They're not communications folks. They are left-brained, linear, Cartesian, technical people. They don't think in the strange, right-brained, normative world of political communications. And they certainly, you know what? They think logically and they operate in good faith, and they couldn't imagine transparent lies being told and accepted. And so they never really engaged in the fight, I would say, right? And so we let a better part of a decade go by without pushing back. That's why we have, as a government, a fight back strategy. But increasingly, think about this, Danielle, if you recall, when the tar sands campaign started 10, 15 years ago, it was overwhelmingly focused on things like the landscape, the impact on air quality, water quality, wildlife, health impacts. It was about like all of those conventional, I call them conventional environmental issues. They don't even talk about those things anymore because we have made continued improvement in reducing or improving air quality, reducing NOx and SOx and particulate. The oil sands have put forward an incredible story about land reclamation and big improvements on water monitoring and species protection. So we've, I think, addressed a lot of those perceived weaknesses in the conventional environmental set of issues. So where they've switched now, of course, is it's all CO2 all the time. And Daniel, we've been studying the campaign by green left environmental pressure groups, especially in European capital markets, that have persuaded a number of major financial institutions, including global insurance companies, to essentially blacklist the Canadian oil sands. And let me tell you what the card trick is. They go to these companies and they say, you have to get out of thermal coal. Thermal coal is the worst source of CO2 in the world. It's cooking the planet, and you must divest or no longer provide financial products to the coal industry. And by the way, there's this thing called tar sands, which is basically coal. It's basically like thermal coal. You got to do that too. And they just kind of sneak it in. I've actually seen the products that they said, these letters, the propaganda that they use. They never point out that this is about the Canadian oil sands. They never actually refer to the emissions performance of the oil sands. They just bring it in under coal. And they basically say, we, environmental groups, are going to depict your bank, your insurance company, your hedge fund as being a planet killer unless you go to zero on coal and tar sands. And they deliberately conflate the two. Well, it's complete rubbish, as you know. And when you actually do an objective ESG analysis on the environmental performance generally and the carbon outputs specifically of Cenovus, CNRL, Suncor, MEG, etc., guess what? They are in the top decile of global oil and gas producers. Guess who's in the bottom decile? Gazprom, Russia, PetroChina, the OPEC producers, Saudi Aramco, in countries where they have no transparency in terms of their reporting requirements. I'm sorry, I'm giving you a very long answer here, but the bottom line is that we have to fight back in those capital markets. That's one of the reasons I've set up an ESG secretariat in my Department of Executive Council. We also have Invest Alberta, with a new agency, which is going to be carrying our ESG metric to those investors. But they're not satisfied when we tell them that we've reduced carbon intensity by 30% in the last 20 years. They want to see what are our ambitious plans for the next 20 years. That's work that we have to undertake.
Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Invest Alberta, because I'm wondering about how people may get connected with those funds that do want to fund these new types of approaches. Like there's a great company I visited at Alberta or at the Edmonton International Airport called Wild and Pine, and they've got an innovative way of using some of the new hydroponic technology to grow little forestry seedlings. They want to grow to be able to do 10 million of these seedlings a year to help with the replanting program and sequestering CO2. Also, C6 is another company that I think Doug Schweitzer has met with them. They have a new proposal for how they can inject CO2 into bitumen and then turn bitumen into carbon fiber without having any emissions. But there's always this sort of connection of, we have these great products, we have these great companies. Is there a role that Invest Alberta can play in connecting them with those who want to fund those types of projects?
Yes, and so Invest Alberta is a new Crown corporation that we set up 6 months ago. It is part of our recovery plan. We realized that, look, as you know, Danielle, our election platform was it was obviously all about jobs and growth, and realizing there'd been a huge outflow of investment from the province. We needed to turn that around. And when we took a look at it, we just thought that our investment promotion efforts were a bit scattered, not properly coordinated, not enough resources devoted to it. As you know, Alberta has a couple dozen offices around the world, but they were almost all focused exclusively on product exports as opposed to inbound investment, and mainly for ag products, which is fine. But we've now brought all of those offices in under the aegis of Invest Alberta, and their number one mandate now is to beat the bushes in those markets for inbound investment opportunities. So if there are companies here looking for, I'll give you an example. I have a acquaintance who runs a really cutting edge Alberta micro distillery, and they want to go into longer term products that add in, to set aside as a distillery barrels for 12 or 20 years is a huge capital investment and risk. So they need to recapitalize. And I connected them to the team at Invest Alberta, who immediately knew of some Indian investors interested in the spirits industry. And so they can play that matchmaking role. I can't guarantee, Danielle, that they can respond to, like they can help every single business enterprise find capital. Let's be realistic, but they have certain areas of focus. I would just encourage any businesses who are interested in this, who are maybe looking for foreign sources of capital, or frankly, domestic sources within Canada. I would ask them to go to the Invest Alberta website, fill out the email form, indicate which area you're operating in, and give them a general idea of what kind of questions you have. And they'll have one of their specialists give you a call and see if they can be helpful.
Excellent. Let me ask you another question, sort of from a general perspective of being able to attract investment capital. I was speaking with Niels Veldhuis, the president of the Fraser Institute. And one of the things he's tracked over the last about 8 years is the amount of capital from Canadians that is leaving the country and the amount of foreign capital we're not able to attract. It's a shortfall of about $186 billion over the last 8 years. And part of what he thinks is the problem is all of the talking down of wealth creators and job creators and the wealthy. And I wonder if there's anything we can do about that, because at the federal level, it seems like they're leaning in the direction. They haven't announced it yet, but it looks like they're leaning in the direction of imposing new wealth taxes. What's your thought on that? On that
point, it's slightly off topic, but relevant. Jack Mintz has a great column out today, I think in the Financial Post, about the danger of globally coordinated minimum corporate taxes. Let me just say, I share your concern. We've seen, look, the biggest flight of capital has been from the Alberta energy sector, and that was in large part driven by policy. The inability to get pipelines built, the price differential, all of those, the regulatory uncertainty. I'll just give you one example. Kinder Morgan, American company, was risking billions of dollars to build the TMX, the Trans Mountain expansion. And with just endless delays, politics and uncertainty, they said, basta, we're out of here, enough. And the federal government ends up holding the bag. I mean, we've got dozens of examples like that. That's $6 billion gone just like that. So there are a lot of reasons for it. One of them is regulatory uncertainty. One of them is just that attitude of discouraging wealth creation. Another is taxes and policy. So that's why the centerpiece of our government's economic strategy has been the job creation tax cut to reduce by a third Alberta's corporate tax burden. We accelerated it, fully implemented it on July 1st of last year. And now we have by far the lowest federal provincial combined business tax rate in Canada. We're at a provincial rate of 8. The other provinces are typically at 12 or higher. And if President Biden succeeds in raising the US federal rate by 8 points, 12 points, that's what's before Congress, Alberta will have by far the lowest combined business taxes in North America, significantly lower than Texas, which doesn't even have a state corporate tax. So I would hope, Danielle, in that, and I got to say this to the business community and to business groups like yours. Please realize you have, like, our government is not perfect. We have made mistakes and we will make mistakes, but you have the most pro-business government in Canada, if not North America right now. You mentioned to me one other government in the world that is reducing rather than increasing taxes on businesses right now, and just raised their corporate tax rate, I think, by 8 points over the next 3-4 years. They're all raising their taxes to deal with the post-COVID costs. We're lowering them to incentivize new private sector investment. We think that's the best way to deal with the fiscal challenge long term. But also, Danielle, this government has cut about 120,000 regulations in 2 years. We are just under 20% reduction of the Alberta provincial regulatory burden in 2 years. We are well on track to hit our 1/3 red tape reduction target within our 4-year mandate. And this is adding up. Do you think all these new investments are happening by accident? I mean, I'm going to do a little bragging here. Sorry, apologize in advance. But yesterday, Seifi Ghanami, the president of Air Products, a massive global corporation, said, when asked by the media, the reason he chose Alberta for this big project, the hydrogen plant, is because, he said, quotes, Premier Kenney and his staff were so aggressive and made such a strong case for Alberta, we couldn't say no. So I'm sorry for being a little tooting our horn here, but I want the Alberta business community to realize we've got something going on. Let's be part of the momentum.
Okay, let me build on that, because I'll tell you the frustration I hear from our members. I when I started in this new job, I called, I think I'm about 50 of our members that I've talked to so far. And the number one issue that they raise with me is how long it takes to get a permit approved. Now, some of that is at the provincial level when you're talking about aggregate and when you're talking about some of the energy projects, but a lot of it is also at the municipal level. And I'm wondering if there's anything you can do. Maybe we can talk about the first one. One of the examples that was given to me from a business owner who does work in the United States said that when they went to another jurisdiction, it's like they had a concierge service. So they had somebody assigned to them to walk them through the project, tell them what the tax incentives might be, tell them what the environment was like, help and give them some certainty that their project was going to get an approval one way or the other within 10 months. In fact, this one particular business owner told me that the governor intervened and said, we can do it faster than that. We can do it in 6 months. Whereas
So the answer is we do too. We have that as well. We've replicated that, and that's part of the reason we set up Invest Alberta. So they do offer concierge service. That's what Mr. Ghanami was talking about yesterday. Like I am on the phone all hours of the day and night with CEOs, just who have active potential investment files, and the first thing I say to them is, are you having any problems? How can we help? Anything we can solve? I'll give you one example, or two examples. We brought in legislation per our platform to give municipalities under the Municipal Government Act the power to offer long-term and substantial property tax breaks to companies to attract new investment. And we did this because we're competing with places like Texas and Louisiana that do that all the time, right? So we need a level playing field. This was actually originally an idea of the Industrial Heartland Association. So we put that in our platform. We brought in the legislation. I'm down in Texas talking to a major multinational about a potential huge petchem invest, like a $10 billion petchem project here. And the CEO said to me, or I think he's like number 2 guy, said, well, Premier, we appreciate that legislation. They said, first of all, your corporate tax cut has made Alberta competitive. So now we're seriously considering you because you brought that in. That's great. Your local property tax incentives, that's great, but it doesn't apply to machinery and equipment. So it's not terribly relevant to us because most of our tax assessment will be based on M&E. Is there any way you could change that? I said, absolutely. I literally picked up my phone at the meeting in Houston, called our Minister of Municipal Affairs and my staff in front of this company. And I said, I explained the problem. I said, I want this changed as quickly as possible. Danielle, we introduced an amendment to the Municipal Government Act within a week. Within a week of that meeting, we changed the law to include the tax incentive, to include M&E in the tax incentive. I'll give you, I could give you so many examples like that where we have acted in real time. And it's so impressive for those companies when we do stuff like that. So we have the concierge service, but I would really like to suggest, Danielle, that for one of your future virtual meetings like this, that we'll make available to you Grant Hunter, Associate Minister for Red Tape Reduction, Jason Nixon, Minister for Environment and Parks, because a lot of the permitting is there, and any other relevant ministers to sit down with your folks and work through any issues that are out there. I know that they have radically reduced permitting times, for example, water permits. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but we've gone from months to weeks on turnaround time there. I think some of the complaints you're hearing may be a memory of things moving slower in the past. But if there are holdups in the system, we are desperate to fix them. We just need to know where the holdups are.
I'll take you up on that. Let's talk about municipal because they might have to be on this as well. I mean, part of the issue that you face at the municipal level of
Oh yeah.
government is that it's uncertain. I mean, if you're a large, I should give some credit to Edmonton. If you're a large project, they will assign some client services folks with you to help see you through the process. But I think you saw in Calgary with the Dairy Queen permit holdup that you've got council members who are making really arbitrary decisions that are putting not just weeks, not just months, but years worth of delays on some of these projects. And the municipalities are a creature of the provincial government. You've got legislation that you could put in place to mandate that they move a lot quicker. Is there any appetite to do that, or how do you think it should be dealt with?
Yeah, there is a big appetite to deal with it. And we hear the same complaint all the time. Very frequently, we hear that the biggest disincentive to investment is actually more at the municipal level. And I'm not saying this to beat up on a different order of government. They've got their challenges. I respect that. But every time I speak to the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association or the Rural Municipalities Association, this is the theme of my talk. It's let's be Team Alberta, rowing in the same direction towards jobs growth and investment. Let's do everything we can to reduce red tape, to speed up permitting, to provide concierge service, to cut our tax burden rather than raise it. A number of municipalities, I think, actually are very good about that. They're very intentional. Others, I don't know, maybe it's a cultural issue. You mentioned that the Dairy Queen stands out as a great Calgary example. There's a town south of Calgary where a local business was going to make a huge investment in a kind of manufacturing industry that would also have a tourism draw. And it was just great for this local town whose economy is struggling. But they had to wait 3 going on 4 years for a permit to build out. And finally, I got municipal affairs here to solve the problem for the Muni, to explain that they could find a creative way around some 1956 bylaw that they were hung up about. So we brought in I forget what we call in the platform. We called it the fiscal report card on municipalities, which is providing metrics. So taxpayers can go online and see how their municipality is performing in terms of tax rates and everything. I think we need to do the same thing somehow on regulation.
Oh, definitely.
For the province, we're doing that through our red tape reduction action plan. We need the munis to do it as well. And look, I guess I don't want to be too critical because I have seen a number of examples where munis are trying to get on board. But I think this could be a really useful area for you to focus on at Alberta Enterprise Group. You guys are the unapologetically pro-business organization. I think you're willing to get into the corners, and this is an area where I think really should focus.
I definitely will. It just even if we were able to track how long it takes to get a permit approval, that would at least allow us to gauge one municipality against another. Look, I want to ask you a bit more about tech because I know you're very bullish on that. I was at a meeting yesterday of the Tiger 21 group, and there were a number of people who are involved in the tech space. And one of the things that they've been asking about is whether there's the ability to use some of our existing investment vehicles like AIMCO. I guess AIMCO already does venture capital investment. You've already talked about the success that they've had in attracting venture capital. But there is this other level in the tech space of, I think they call it pre-revenue investment. And you need the angel investment because for every 100 tech companies, a couple of them are going to turn into unicorns. You just don't know which ones are going to be unicorns. And if you wait until they are, then you might kind of miss out on the investment opportunity. Is there any thinking going around to how you might be able to incentivize that early angel investment?
Yes, and there's been, as I say, as you know, there's huge momentum in the tech sector in Alberta, which is great news. Let me just tell you what we've done. First of all, we brought in as part of the recovery plan the Innovation Employment Grant, which we announced in July of last year, which is a big look. You and I, neither of us like government, but micro incentives and you know what from a pure classical liberal view we would call interventions. But Danielle, I'm here to tell you that if we want to play in that huge space in the future economy, in the digital sector, in innovation and all of that, we have to be competitive. And lowering the general business tax rate was a key part of our strategy to give Alberta the best macroeconomic conditions for new investment. But the reality is, as you just said, these startups don't generate taxable profits for years. I think the CEO of Benevity, which is it's a unicorn. Alberta-based company. They recently raised $1 billion on an IPO. Benevity, the CEO told me they've been at this for 10 years, and I think they still haven't generated a taxable profit. So they don't benefit from generally low tax rates. They need access to capital, and Danielle, we have to compete with BC, Quebec, Ontario, and these U.S. states that have lots of bespoke incentives for the startups that are in a pre-profit, pre-tax phase. So we had to make a decision as a government. We could either stick rigidly to like our purest version of classical liberal economics, or we could deal with reality. And we need to deal with reality. We need diversification. We need a future for oil and gas, but we need diversification. That means we need digital tech and innovation. That means we need startups. That means we need policies that incentivize companies that are not generating profits. So you're right about that. That's why we created the Innovation Employment Grant, which is a labor cost offset for them for every incremental job that they create, I think up to 100 jobs. We also recapitalized the Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which provides, it is a fund of funds. So they invest in venture capital funds who in turn invest primarily in Alberta. So we don't have bureaucrats picking individual winners and losers. They're just looking at overall performance of funds and their commitment to Alberta. We put 175 million additional in there. So I now think they have a revolving fund of around $500 million. AIMCO, their mandate is to maximize returns for pension holders. And I don't know, Danielle, we would be very reluctant to go in the direction of what Quebec has done with the Caisse de dépôt, which is their version of AIMCO, where they explicitly use it as an instrument of economic policy, of industrial policy, with all kinds of micro funds that support incentives. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I can understand why you wouldn't want to do that with pension money. I don't know that there's an answer to this. I'm just letting you know that this has been a hole that I've heard about since for the past 10 years of trying to find a way to give an incentive for those angel investors. And I don't know if I have an answer. That's why I was asking you if you did.
We did commission a report from what we called the Innovation Working Capital Group, or Innovation Capital Working Group, excuse me. And they're the guys who came up with the idea of this Innovation Employment Grant that we've rolled out. There's another group that was led by prominent Calgary businessman and lawyer, Brian Fileski, that has come up with a series of recommendations addressing exactly the issue that you've raised and that we are actively studying, to use government talk. So we're looking at potentially more policy to support this area.
Fabulous. I'll make sure that we give you some suggestions as you go through that process. You've mentioned India a lot, and I'm really quite interested because it always seems to me that in Canada, we're so focused on either America or China, and yet there's another huge market for us to either look at as a destination for our products or for inbound investing. And because you've mentioned it so many times already in our conversation, tell us what the opportunity is there.
Well, it's obviously enormous. It's no secret that I'm a friend of India. I played a significant role in the Harper government in our massive improvement of Canada-India relations after it had been in the deep freeze for 30 years. And I have good friends amongst the senior Indian leadership. You may remember I did a visit as leader of the opposition to renew some of those friendships. We have Indian companies that, look, there's Indian oil and gas companies that do have an investment presence in Alberta, but increasingly India is becoming the United States continues to be the world leader in tech and innovation, but India is catching up in a big way. And many of the world's largest IT companies, particularly in the IT consulting and services space, are Indian companies. Their original business model for companies like groups like Tata Consulting, Infosys, Emphasis, et cetera, was a lot of offshoring. So North American corporations that needed backroom tech support would go to these Indian companies, and they would be operating at much lower labor costs, let's be honest, because a software engineer in Bangalore is probably getting paid 20% of a software engineer in Silicon Valley, if that. So they were able to have a huge competitive advantage in a industry that is borderless. You don't need to be physically present necessarily to do the work. So a lot of this was a kind of international contracting out model that they built. But more and more, these companies realize they need a physical presence and to service their local clients. So that's one of the reasons we've seen two of these major Indian companies locate headquarters in Calgary this past month or two. There will be a lot more of that. Danielle, there's an overused word in the tech sector, ecosystem. Sometimes I roll my eyes with all the jargon that you get out of the tech people. But really what that means is it really means kind of an industry. It means a multifaceted industry. It means you've got colleges and universities that are churning out kids with high levels of digital literacy and skills. It means you've got a lot of startup activity because there's a lot of creative destruction in that space. As you know, I think 80% of those startups never make it to a commercial phase. So people are constantly getting access to venture capital, trying to start something, it fails, but they go into something else. They learn maybe one tranche of their tech project turns out to be commercially viable, and they go off and they raise money again. That's the ecosystem idea. A critical part of that is the labor market. You need enough workers with relevant training and skills. Here's where I think we have an opportunity. We have high unemployment. In places like Calgary, we've got tens of thousands of technically brilliant people, petroleum engineers and finance people who got laid off from their white collar jobs in the oil patch in the past 5 years. They're underemployed or unemployed. If we can bridge the gap for them to get trained into digital jobs, there's many places across North America where software engineers are getting paid $120,000 a year on average. These are not bargain basement jobs. So I think that's our potential if we can attract more investment from these Indian companies, for example.
All right, let's talk a bit about, because I know that in your previous life as well, you did a tour of countries that are well ahead of us in their approach to trades training. As I was going through, I put in a submission for a charter school for trades. I should just let you know that. And I know that Lisa Davis has been helping me. She's got a STEM charter school that has been approved. But I'd be interested in knowing what your vision is on that, because you created a separate pathway to get approval for trades education. And I just know from the people I spoke with who accompanied you on that trip, and there's so many of them, that this is an area that you think that we can make some real changes in. You've got your post-secondary minister, Dimitri Nicolaitis, leading it. But what is it that you're hoping to accomplish there? This
area is really close to my heart. What I'm hoping to look, as the federal minister for employment, I took that study mission to Germany to understand the success of their what they call dual training system, which is basically their apprenticeship system. In Danielle, in Canada, we have historically high youth unemployment, and in good economic times, we also have skill and labor shortages. You'll remember this. You used to beat up on me when I was the federal immigration minister for not letting more temporary foreign workers to address the skill shortages that Alberta businesses were facing a few years ago. And so there's this weird mismatch in our labor market, right? Unemployed young people, but skill and labor shortages. But in Germany, they don't have that problem. This is the Germanic system: Switzerland, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, because their whole education system is geared towards labor market integration, towards the jobs that are actually available through experiential learning, technical on-the-job training, involving employers and unions. So how does that work? Well, typically, if you're a 16-year-old, let me back that up. When you're sort of in grade 9, you're grade 8 or 9, sort of 14, 15, you get 2 1-week mini internships or job placements. So that's 4 over basically grades 8 and 9, 4 weeks spread out over those 2 years, where you get to check out what your interests are. You get to go and spend a week with a photographer if you're interested in, and follow them around and learn that business. You get to go spend a week, I don't know, in a bank, seeing what do bankers do, go on a work site and what do machinists do. So they give real life job exposure to, like, bring your kid to work week, and so they can figure out where's their interest. And then by the time they're 16, sort of grade 10, they lock into an apprenticeship, which basically means 3 to 4 weeks a day in the workplace where they're paid modestly, but they're still paid, and 1 to 2 days a week in the gymnasium, which is basically the high school classroom. And that's a 3-year program. By the end of it, they graduate with a trade certificate, which is like our Red Seal in Canada. But here's the key thing in Germany. That certificate is considered by everyone to have the same value, merit, and worth as a university degree. There is no snobbery, no second-class view about vocational training. I talked to the top academic in Germany about their training system. He has 2 PhDs. I asked him, what's your biggest concern? He said, my concern is that we're seeing a growing share of young Germans going directly into academic university as opposed to these apprenticeship programs. Danielle, could you imagine finding a university professor in Canada who would bemoan too many university students and not enough going to SAIT and NAIT or going into apprenticeship programs? They have a totally different mindset. They call it the parity of esteem, the equality of esteem between trades and professions, between apprenticeship and academic learning. That's what we need. Now, that's a huge cultural shift. We're not going to get there overnight. We're trying to increase the incentives. We've massively expanded the high school registered apprenticeship program. We've given more money to careers the next generation. Minister Nicolaides has changed the funding formula for our post-secondary institutions to provide more funding to programs that have better employment outcomes, trying to bend the curve. So I shouldn't pick on any discipline, but I don't know, how many more master's degrees in sociology do we need? But I'll tell you this, during the boom years, we had 2-year wait lists to get into a welding programs. Why then would we be subsidizing a program with little or no labor market demand while constraining resources to programs with massive demand? So those are just some of my random thoughts. We put together an advisory committee on skills for jobs, which has provided a bunch of recommendations. I could go on, but this is a special one. You should bring in Dimitri Nicolaides to talk on this subject alone.
I absolutely will. I want to understand where you're going as well with charter hospitals, because I know that in the education department, since I've now submitted an application, you actually have a dedicated person in that department that will help walk you through the application to ensure that you've made all of the you've crossed sort of all the T's and dotted all the I's that you need to before it goes to the minister. Do you have something similar in healthcare? Because I know of a couple of people who are interested in pursuing, now that you've allowed the idea of charter hospitals, but what is the pathway? Is there a pathway? Do you know of any initiatives that are coming forward? And I'm interested in knowing what you hope to achieve with that.
For sure. Well, Minister Shandro opened up a request for proposals process last year, pre-COVID, for what we call chartered surgical facilities. And he opened up a substream for First Nations that are interested in hosting these facilities on reserve, which we think would be a very creative way of dealing with the federal government should it ever seek to object to charter surgical facilities. When we talk about charter surgical facilities, so let me just finish that thought. I'm sorry, Danielle. So the window closed for responses to our RFP, but I believe the health department would always be open to additional proponents if they're out there. Danielle, we had to kind of pause some of the work on that just because of the pandemic. Obviously, health became single-mindedly focused on combating the pandemic. But I know Minister Shandro will be coming back to that. Very enthusiastic. We've set aside money to expand surgical infrastructure and we have operating rooms and whatnot across the province. So what it really means is this. Saskatchewan led what they call the Strategic Surgical Initiative under the Wall government, and they invited, dare I say it, privately operated surgical clinics, day clinics, to bid for government-insured surgeries. And lo and behold, they found that the private clinics were able to perform more surgeries at lower cost with equal or better outcomes. And it shouldn't be surprising because these are very focused clinics where they're doing one thing. They do it extremely well. You know, think, for example, of the Shouldice Clinic that is specialized in hernia surgery in Toronto for 75 years. They are grandfathered under the Canada Health Act, by the way. Think of the gimbal eye clinics, for example. So when you have a specialized clinic, they become super efficient at what they do. They are not constrained in the same way as the government is by collective bargaining agreements and the coffee breaks that interrupt surgical schedules. They don't have to ration the use of operating rooms like we do in the government hospitals. So they're able to operate longer hours, greater labor productivity, more efficient, doing more procedures at lower cost. But Daniel, this is not privatization of healthcare, because at the end of the day, the payer is the government of Alberta acting as your insurance company. So you never take out your checkbook to get that. The government pays for it. But why wouldn't we want more surgeries done less expensively? It means we can reduce the wait times, which are brutal. They're brutal in this province. And here's our basic point. The patient must be at the center of our healthcare system, not interest groups, not political ideology. This, of course, is being opposed by all the usual suspects because they prefer, I think, a quasi-union monopoly on the delivery of all services. That's not what Medicare means. Medicare means you don't have to take out your credit card to get service. But as the Supreme Court said in the Shuali decision, access to a waiting list is not access to health care. We have a moral obligation to give people the care that they need within a reasonable clinical time frame. And we are failing in that obligation right now. So we make no apologies for embracing the efficiency of the private sector in delivering publicly insured services like this.
Okay, I know you have to go. You've been generous with your time. I'm sort of monitoring the comments that are coming in. I've got half of our people saying, thanks for staying on topic and talking about business issues, and the other half that are mad at me that I haven't made a punching bag out of you. You have faced a couple of challenges, and I'll tell you one of the things that I do hear from my members that they're quite concerned about. I think they're worried that if you can't win back some of that vote that seems to be sliding over to the Wild Rose, that we might end up with an anti-business NDP government in 2 years' time. And so just to finish off, what do you hope to do to be able to win back some of that group that voted for you in the last election, but are feeling a little disillusioned right now? Well,
Danielle, COVID has been brutal on all of us, on the whole province and the whole world. It's been particularly brutal on this government in a context where, as you and I have discussed before, we've had an extremely polarized debate about COVID in this province, and our government has been essentially, we lost the confidence of a lot of Albertans who thought that our COVID response was too weak and too reluctant. There consistently in the polling that we have tracked, there has been about 40%, sometimes more than 50% of the population who thought our government was too slow and too reluctant to bring in public health restrictions. And then there has been pretty consistently 15 to 20% who think, like you, that we were too fast and too stringent in the public health restrictions. The truth is, we have tried with great care to navigate a common sense middle ground that would minimize deaths, prevent an overwhelming of the healthcare system, while also minimizing the very real negative impacts of restrictions. And in the process, we managed to tick off both sides. And that is, I think, at the heart of it. I don't think we've lost any supporters, Danielle, because of our general performance as a government. We have implemented already substantially or completely over 80% of our platform commitment halfway through our mandate. So we haven't lost any conservative supporters for having repealed the NDP carbon tax, for having brought in the Open for Business Act, for having brought in the job creation tax cut, for having repealed the Bill 6 attack on farmers, for having restored parental authority in education, for having brought forward a back to basics focus in the curriculum, for having focused on apprenticeships and trades in the education system. We haven't lost any conservative supporters for having sued Justin Trudeau over the carbon tax, for suing him over the Bill C-69, No More Pipelines law, for supporting a First Nations lawsuit against the Tanker Ban 48. We didn't, I think, lose the conservative votes over making the investment in Keystone XL to go to the wall to defend a future for the energy sector. I don't think we've lost any conservative votes for having cut the regulatory burden by 20% in Alberta, but for having brought in a citizens initiative law and a recall law, the most important democratic reforms in Alberta history. I don't think we've lost Conservative support for our basic performance as a government. I think people were ticked off with us for restrictions that we felt were necessary to avoid massive deaths and an overwhelming of the healthcare system. But now we are coming to the very end of COVID. We get to move into what I call the best summer ever. We will be lifting all restrictions end of June, beginning of July, not just for summer, but for good. And really, as a province, we get to hit the reset. We emerge into the strongest economic growth in the country, 7% plus economic growth this year, and we think next. Recovery in commodity prices, and we begin to yield the fruit of the incredibly hard work that we have done in our pro-growth policies, all of the deregulation, the tax cuts, all of it coming together in what is going to be an economic renaissance. Our traditional supporters, or our voters, elected us to do two things fundamentally. Grow the economy, remember, jobs, economy, and pipelines, and fight for a fair deal for Alberta. We will be recentered on those issues, jobs, the economy, and this fall we'll have the referendum on equalization. We continue to work on other bold initiatives to increase Alberta's autonomy in the federation. So we get 2 years. A week is an eternity in politics, as you know, and you've been through some of those weeks, as have I.
Sure have.
And we've got 105 weeks before the next election. That's 105 eternities. You're going to look back a year. Let's do this interview. Let's book it for a year from now. You're going to look back. The entire political situation, I think, will look totally different. Once we can get out there, reconnect with people, and communicate everything that we've done that they elected us to do, and COVID recedes as a distant and bitter memory, I am deeply optimistic.
You know what? Next time we speak, I hope I never have to say the C word again. Thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. I appreciate it. You got it. That was the Alberta Premier, Jason Kenney. You'll be able to watch this later on podcast. I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. We'll see you again.
Thanks, Danielle, and congratulations on your new position here.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.